My stepmother threw my inheritance papers into the fire. Dead mother can't give gifts, she laughed. My father said nothing. I didn't react. I just reached into my bag and set a thin, black envelope on the table. The photograph slipped from my trembling fingers, landing face down on the dusty floor behind the old cupboard. I'd been searching for my mother's jewelry box, the one Nicole claimed didn't exist, when I discovered this hidden treasure. My heart hammered against my ribs as I turned it over, revealing my mother's elegant handwriting. For my Amelia, when truth feels stolen. The words made no sense. Truth feels stolen? What did she mean? But something about those carefully penned letters sent a chill down my spine, as if Mom had reached beyond the grave to whisper a warning in my ear. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories of resilience and justice. If you believe that young women deserve protection from those who would silence them, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach others who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. 6 months had passed since the funeral. 6 months since Ryan had stood at her graveside, tears streaming down his face, promising to honor her memory forever. 6 months since Nicole had appeared at our doorstep with her designer luggage and predatory smile, claiming she was there to help us through this difficult transition. Help. What a twisted joke. I clutched the photograph to my chest, studying my mother's radiant face. She'd been so alive in this picture, her eyes sparkling with secrets I'd never gotten the chance to learn. Now in her place stood a woman who treated our home like a conquest and me like an obstacle to be removed. The sound of Nicole's stilettos clicking across the hardwood floors made my stomach clench. I quickly slipped the photograph into my pocket, my fingers lingering on the smooth edges. Whatever Mom had meant by those words, I'd figure it out later. Amelia. Nicole's voice cut through the house like broken glass. Your father wants to see you in the living room. Now. Your father. Not Dad or Ryan. She'd stripped away even that small intimacy, reducing our relationship to clinical terms. I emerged from behind the cupboard, brushing dust from my clothes, and found Nicole standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against her silk blouse, a nervous habit she'd developed whenever she was about to deliver bad news. We need to discuss your living arrangements, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. This house needs better organization. Better organization. Code 4. Your presence is inconvenient. I walked past her without responding, my shoulder barely brushing hers. The living room had been transformed beyond recognition. Mom's antique furniture had vanished, replaced by Nicole's sterile modern pieces. The family portraits that once lined the mantelpiece were gone, erased as if we'd never existed. In their place sat Nicole's collection of crystal figurines, cold, lifeless objects that caught the light but reflected nothing meaningful. Ryan sat hunched on the leather sofa, avoiding my gaze. This man who'd once carried me on his shoulders, who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped with homework, now looked like a stranger. His shoulders sagged under invisible weight, and deep lines had carved themselves around his eyes. When had he become so diminished? Sit down, sweetheart, he said softly, patting the cushion beside him. But Nicole was quicker. She positioned herself between us, her hand resting possessively on Ryan's shoulder. Actually, Ryan, I think Amelia should stand. This won't take long. The dismissal hit like a slap. I remained standing, my chin lifted in defiance, while Nicole launched into her prepared speech about making space for healing and creating a fresh start. Translation. My bedroom was being converted into her personal office. Where exactly am I supposed to sleep? I asked, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. The guest room has a perfectly good bed, Nicole replied, waving her hand as if my question was trivial. Besides, you'll be going to college soon. It's time you learned to be more flexible. Flexible. As if I were the one being unreasonable. Ryan finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine for a brief moment. I searched his face for any sign of the man who'd once been my hero, who'd promised Mom he'd always protect me. But all I saw was weakness and guilt, emotions he was too cowardly to address. It's just temporary, he mumbled, the words barely audible. Everything's temporary, Ryan, Nicole said with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. That's what makes life exciting. That night, as I packed my belongings into boxes, I discovered more evidence of Nicole's systematic erasure. My mother's favorite cookbook had disappeared from the kitchen. The throw pillows she'd sewn by hand were gone from the family room. Even the small ceramic bird she'd kept on the windowsill, a gift from her own mother, had vanished without explanation. When I confronted Nicole about the missing items, she shrugged with theatrical innocence. "Oh, those old things. I donated them to charity. Your mother would have wanted them to help others, don't you think?" But it was the journals that broke something inside me. I'd been searching for them for weeks, hoping to find comfort in Mom's words during these dark times. Instead, I found torn pages scattered in the garbage bin behind the house, their edges blackened from where someone had tried to burn them. Mom's careful handwriting was partially destroyed, but I could make out fragments, suspicious of Ryan's finances. And Nicole asking too many questions about the will. My hands shook as I gathered the salvageable pieces, treating each fragment like a sacred relic. That night, alone in my new cramped quarters, I spread the pages across my bed and tried to piece together my mother's final thoughts. The picture that emerged was disturbing. Mom had been worried about something in the weeks before her death. Something involving money and Ryan, and Nicole's sudden interest in our family's affairs. The next evening I was studying in the guest room when I heard Nicole's voice drifting up from the kitchen. She was on the phone, her tone sharp and businesslike. "No, she's still here," Nicole was saying. "But she's just a kid. What can she really do? The will is straightforward enough, and Ryan's already signed most of the transfer papers." "Transfer papers?" My blood turned to ice. "Trust me," Nicole continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She's a legal nuisance at best. Once the will is settled, she won't matter much longer. Ryan's completely under my control now." I pressed my ear against the door, straining to catch every word. "The inheritance? Please. Dead women don't have much say in these matters. Everything will be ours within the month." That's when something fundamental shifted inside me. The grief that had been weighing me down for months transformed into something harder, more focused. Nicole had revealed her true nature, and Ryan was either complicit or too weak to stop her. Either way, I was alone in this fight. But maybe I wasn't as powerless as they believed. That night, I pulled out a notebook and began documenting everything. Every cruel comment, every missing item, every suspicious conversation. I wrote down dates, times, and witnesses. I photographed the torn journal pages and made copies of everything I could find. If Nicole wanted to play games, I'd learn the rules. And I'd win. 3 weeks of sleepless nights and careful documentation had turned me into someone I barely recognized. The shy girl who'd once accepted every slight without question was gone, replaced by someone with steel in her spine and fire in her eyes. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to find them. The law offices of Dalton and Associates sat in a brick building downtown, its windows grimy with age and neglect. I'd been here once before years ago, when Mom had insisted I accompany her for what she'd called important business. At the time, I'd been more interested in the candy dish on the receptionist's desk than whatever legal matters were being discussed. Now, standing before the heavy oak door, I felt the weight of that memory pressing down on me. The receptionist, a woman with kind eyes and silver hair, looked up from her typewriter. "Can I help you, dear? I'm Amelia Morrison. I need to speak with Mr. Dalton about my mother's estate." "Catherine Morrison." Her expression softened immediately. "Oh, sweetheart. I remember you. You're so much taller now." She pressed a button on her desk. "Mr. Dalton? Catherine Morrison's daughter is here to see you." The door to the inner office creaked open, revealing a man who seemed to have aged decades since I'd last seen him. Mr. Dalton's white hair had thinned considerably, and he walked with a pronounced limp, leaning heavily on a carved wooden cane. But his eyes, sharp and intelligent, remained exactly as I remembered. "Amelia," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that made my throat tighten. "I've been expecting you." "Expecting me?" He gestured toward a leather chair across from his desk. "Your mother was very specific about timing. She said you'd come when you were ready to hear the truth." My heart began to race. What truth? Mr. Dalton settled into his chair with a grunt, his arthritic fingers fumbling with a locked drawer. "Your mother was one of the most perceptive women I've ever known. She saw things others missed, understood patterns that escaped the rest of us." He withdrew a manila folder, its edges worn from handling. She came to me 6 months before she died, Amelia. He was concerned. Concerned about what? About your future. About Ryan. About the woman he'd been seeing. He paused, studying my face. She knew about Nicole long before you did. The words hit me like a physical blow. That's impossible. Nicole showed up after the funeral. Nicole showed up at your house after the funeral, Mr. Dalton corrected gently. She'd been in Ryan's life for over a year before that. Your mother hired a private investigator. He slid a photograph across the desk. Ryan and Nicole together at a restaurant laughing over wine. The timestamp showed it was taken 3 months before Mom's death. My hands trembled as I picked it up, studying Ryan's face. He looked happy. Happier than I'd seen him in years. Your mother left very specific instructions, Mr. Dalton continued. She anticipated that Nicole would eventually show her true colors, that she'd try to eliminate you from the picture entirely. Catherine was preparing for that possibility. He reached into the folder again, this time withdrawing a black envelope sealed with dark wax. My name was written across the front in Mom's careful handwriting. She told me to give this to you when her voice was silenced for good. I confess I didn't understand what she meant at the time. But given what you've probably experienced these past few months. I stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it. What's inside? I don't know. She sealed it herself, made me promise not to open it under any circumstances. But she was very clear about the timing. You'll know when the moment is right. I took the envelope with shaking hands, feeling its weight. Whatever was inside felt substantial, important. I tucked it carefully into my purse, my mind reeling with questions. There's something else, Mr. Dalton said quietly. Your mother asked me to tell you about a storage unit downtown. Unit 47 at Secure Space on Maple Street. She said you'd need to look there when you started asking the right questions. I left the law office with more questions than answers, but also with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since Mom's death. The storage unit was a 20-minute drive through the city's older neighborhoods, past shops and cafes that had seen better days. Secure Space turned out to be a converted warehouse, its metal doors stretching in long rows under fluorescent lights. Unit 47 was in the back corner, secured with a combination lock. I tried Mom's birthday, then mine, then Ryan's. Nothing worked. Finally, in desperation, I tried the date of her death. The lock clicked open. Inside, I found boxes of documents, photographs, and personal items I thought had been lost forever. Mom's college yearbooks, letters from friends, financial records dating back years. But it was the small cardboard box labeled for Amelia that made my breath catch. Inside were items that didn't belong to the mother I thought I knew. A birth certificate with unfamiliar names, medical records from a doctor I'd never heard of, and correspondence with someone named Matthew Chen. The letters were intimate, loving, written in a hand I didn't recognize but signed with obvious affection. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in tissue paper, was a photograph that made my world tilt sideways. It showed my mother, radiant and laughing, standing beside a man with kind eyes and graying temples. She looked younger than I'd ever seen her, her face free of the worry lines that had marked her final years. On the back, in her familiar handwriting, Matt. My real forever. I sank onto a nearby box, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Who was this man? Why had Mom kept his picture? And why had she hidden it away with documents that suggested? Oh, that was impossible. But as I continued searching through the box, more pieces of the puzzle emerged. Hospital records from my birth showed a different father's name than what appeared on my official birth certificate. Legal documents suggested a name change, a deliberate obscuring of the truth. And at the very bottom, a DNA test kit that had never been used, along with a note in Mom's handwriting. When you're ready to know who you really are. I spent the next hour cataloging everything, my mind struggling to process the implications. The mother I thought I knew had been keeping secrets, big ones. The man I'd called father my entire life might not be my biological parent. And somewhere out there was a man named Matthew Chen who apparently held the key to understanding my true identity. As I prepared to leave, I noticed one more item tucked behind the boxes. A small white envelope with my name on it. Inside was a key and an address along with a note. The woman who cared for me in my final weeks lives here. She knows things I couldn't tell you myself. Trust her, Amelia. She loved me like a daughter and she'll love you the same way. The address led me to a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, where I found myself face to face with a woman whose eyes filled with tears the moment she saw me. "Oh, honey," she whispered, pulling me into a fierce hug. "You look just like her. I'm Margaret Santos. I was your mother's nurse those last few months. She told me you'd come eventually." Margaret's living room was filled with photographs and mementos, a shrine to the patients she'd cared for over the years. But it was the prominent place Mom's picture held on her mantle that told me everything I needed to know about their relationship. "She was scared," Margaret said, settling into her chair with a cup of tea. "Not of dying, she'd made peace with that. She was scared of what would happen to you after she was gone. She knew Ryan was weak, that he'd fall under Nicole's influence. She spent her last months trying to protect you from what was coming." "Did she know about?" I hesitated, unsure how to voice the question that was burning inside me. "About Matthew? Yes, she knew you'd find out eventually. She wanted to tell you herself, but she ran out of time." Margaret's eyes grew distant. "She never stopped loving him, you know. Even after she married Ryan, even after all those years. Matthew was her first love, her true love. You were the gift of that love." The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. But it also gave me something I'd been lacking for months. Hope. I wasn't alone in this fight. Mom had been preparing for this moment long before I even knew there was a battle to be fought. 2 days after my visit with Margaret, I returned home to find Nicole humming in the kitchen, her movements unnaturally cheerful as she arranged white lilies in a crystal vase. The flowers filled the room with their cloying sweetness, a scent that reminded me uncomfortably of funeral parlors. She'd changed the entire atmosphere of the house. Everything was pristine, sterile, as if she were preparing for an important guest. "Oh, Amelia," she called out without turning around, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Perfect timing. We're having a visitor tomorrow. Someone very important." The black envelope from Mr. Dalton seemed to burn against my chest where I'd hidden it beneath my shirt. I'd been carrying it everywhere since our meeting, waiting for the right moment. The moment Mom had somehow known would come. "What kind of visitor?" I asked, setting my backpack down slowly. Nicole finally turned, and I was struck by her appearance. She dressed entirely in white, a flowing silk blouse, tailored pants, even white shoes that looked fresh from the box. Her hair was styled in an elaborate updo, and she wore the pearl necklace that had once belonged to my grandmother. The one Mom had promised would be mine someday. "The family lawyer, of course," Nicole said, touching the pearls at her throat. "It's time to settle some administrative details. Your mother's estate has been in limbo far too long." My blood turned cold. Mom's will was already read. Everything was settled months ago. "Oh, sweetheart," Nicole laughed, the sound like ice cracking. "There were some complications. Some documents that needed clarification. But don't worry your pretty little head about it. These grown-up matters will be handled properly." That evening, I watched from my bedroom window as Nicole directed Ryan in rearranging the living room furniture. She positioned the leather sofa to face the fireplace, placed a small table in the center, and lit candles around the room. The whole setup looked ceremonial, almost ritualistic. Ryan moved like a man in a trance, following her instructions without question or comment. I spent the night clutching the black envelope, Mom's words echoing in my mind, when her voice was silenced for good. Whatever was about to happen, I knew it would be the moment she'd been preparing for. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that makes everything feel ominous. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that made me feel strong. Dark jeans, a black sweater, and the silver locket Mom had given me for my 16th birthday. Inside the locket was a photo of us together, taken just months before she died. She looked tired but peaceful, as if she'd already made peace with whatever was coming. The lawyer arrived precisely at 10 o'clock. He was a thin man with nervous eyes and a briefcase that seemed too large for his slight frame. Nicole greeted him at the door like an old friend, her laughter echoing through the hallway as she led him to the living room. "Amelia, darling," she called out, her voice syrupy sweet. "Come join us. This concerns you too." I found them arranged around the coffee table. Nicole perched on the edge of the sofa like a bird of prey, Ryan slumped in his chair avoiding everyone's gaze, and the lawyer fumbling with papers from his briefcase. The original copy of Mom's will lay spread across the table, its pages crisp and official looking. "Now then," the lawyer began, his voice shaky. Mrs. Morrison, the current Mrs. Morrison, has brought to my attention some irregularities in the original will. It seems there may have been some confusion about the testator's mental state at the time of signing. Confusion. I spoke for the first time, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. Nicole waved her hand dismissively. Your mother was very sick at the end, dear. The medications, the pain. It's understandable that she might not have been thinking clearly. Leaving everything to a teenager? It's simply not practical. She was completely lucid when she signed that will, I said, my voice growing stronger. I was there. So was Mr. Dalton. Mr. Dalton is an old man with failing memory, Nicole replied smoothly. And you were grieving. Neither of you can be considered reliable witnesses to your mother's mental state. The lawyer cleared his throat uncomfortably. The new documentation suggests that Mrs. Morrison, Catherine Morrison, intended for her assets to be managed by her husband until Miss Morrison reaches the age of 25. At that time she would inherit a modest portion of the estate. How modest? I asked, though I already knew the answer would be insulting. Enough for college tuition and basic living expenses, Nicole said, her smile sharp as a knife. Your mother wouldn't have wanted you to be burdened with financial responsibilities at such a young age. Ryan finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine for a brief moment. I searched his face desperately for any sign of the man who'd once been my father, who'd promised Mom he'd always protect me. But all I saw was weakness and guilt, emotions he was too cowardly to confront. This is fraud, I said quietly. This is reality, Nicole snapped, her mask finally slipping. Your mother is dead, Amelia. Dead women don't get to make decisions anymore. The living have to clean up their messes. She stood up abruptly, snatching the will from the table with theatrical flourish. In one swift motion she strode to the fireplace and tossed the document into the flames. The papers caught immediately, curling and blackening as Mom's final wishes literally went up in smoke. Dead women can't give gifts, Nicole laughed, watching the flames consume the last legal protection my mother had tried to provide for me. The lawyer gasped, half rising from his chair. Mrs. Morrison, that was the original. That was a mistake, Nicole cut him off. A sick woman's delusion. We have the corrected version right here. She gestured toward the new documents spread across the table. I watched the flames dance, consuming the paper that represented my mother's love and protection. But instead of feeling defeated, I felt something else entirely, a cold clarity that settled over me like armor. This was the moment. The moment Mom had somehow known would come, when Nicole would reveal her true nature so completely that there could be no doubt about her intentions. Ryan said nothing. He just sat there staring at his hands, while his wife destroyed his dead wife's final wishes. In that moment I realized that the man I'd called father was already gone, replaced by someone too weak to fight for what was right, too broken to honor the woman he'd claimed to love. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't scream or beg or plead. Instead, I reached into my bag with steady hands and withdrew the black envelope Mr. Dalton had given me. The wax seal caught the firelight as I placed it carefully on the table. Silence fell over the room like a heavy curtain. Nicole's triumphant expression faltered as she stared at the mysterious envelope. The lawyer's nervous shuffling stopped. Even Ryan looked up, confusion replacing the guilt in his eyes. You've triggered it, I said softly, my voice carrying a weight that seemed to fill the entire room. She knew you'd do this. She knew exactly what kind of person you really are, Nicole. And she left something behind for people like you. Nicole's face went pale, her confident smirk fading as she realized that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't been as clever as she thought. The envelope sat between us like a loaded weapon, its black surface reflecting the dying flames of my mother's burned will. What is that? She whispered. I smiled for the first time in months, and it felt like my mother's smile, full of secrets and quiet power. Mom's insurance policy, I said. She always was 10 steps ahead of everyone else. My fingers trembled as I broke the black wax seal, the sound echoing through the silent room like a gunshot. Nicole's eyes were fixed on my hands, her earlier confidence cracking like paint on a weathered wall. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his chair, while Ryan remained frozen as if moving might shatter whatever fragile reality he'd been clinging to. Inside the envelope I found 2 documents that would change everything. The first was a legal clause, typed on official letterhead, with my mother's signature notarized at the bottom. The language was complex, full of legal terminology I didn't fully understand, but the core message was crystal clear. In the event that Catherine Morrison's last will and testament is destroyed, altered or otherwise invalidated by any party, the following trust provisions shall immediately activate. The second document made my breath catch in my throat. It was a DNA test result, sealed in its own smaller envelope with a note in Mom's handwriting. For when the truth can no longer be hidden. What does it say? Nicole demanded, her voice sharp with barely contained panic. I looked up at her, then at Ryan, then back at the DNA results in my hands. This moment felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that once I jumped, there would be no going back to the life I'd known. It says that everything you think you know about this family is a lie, I said quietly. With deliberate slowness, I unfolded the DNA test results. The scientific language was dense, but the conclusion was printed in bold letters at the bottom. Probability of paternity, 0%. Ryan Morrison is excluded as the biological father of Amelia Morrison. The paper slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the coffee table, landing face up where everyone could see it. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft crackling of the fireplace where my mother's will had been reduced to ash. Ryan's face went through a series of transformations, confusion, realization, and finally, a kind of hollow devastation that made my heart ache despite everything he'd put me through. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly like a fish pulled from water. That's impossible, he whispered. Is it? I asked, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. Think about it, Ryan. Really think. When did you and Mom meet? When did she get pregnant? Do the math. Nicole's sharp laugh cut through the tension like a blade. Well. Looks like your precious Catherine was keeping secrets after all. A cheating wife and an illegitimate child. How perfectly scandalous. But her laughter died when she saw my expression. I wasn't devastated by this revelation. I was relieved. You still don't understand, I said, reaching back into the envelope. This isn't about scandal. This is about protection. I pulled out a business card that had been tucked behind the legal document. The name printed in elegant script made Nicole's face go white. Matthew Chin, attorney at law, Chin and Associates. My biological father, I announced, savoring the way Nicole's confident smirk completely disappeared. The man my mother never stopped loving. The man who's been watching over me my entire life. Ryan's voice was barely a whisper. Matt? From college. But Catherine said he moved away, that they lost touch. She said what she had to say to protect me, I replied. Because you, Ryan, you never legally adopted me. My birth certificate was amended when you married Mom, but the original documents still exist. And according to those documents, Matthew Chin has been my legal guardian all along. He just stepped back to let Mom live her life. I could see the pieces clicking together in Ryan's mind. The college tuition that always seemed mysteriously covered. The medical bills that never quite matched what insurance should have paid. The trust fund for emergencies that Mom claimed came from her parents' estate. He's been paying for everything, Ryan said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. Everything, I confirmed. My education, my healthcare, even some of the household expenses you thought were coming from Mom's savings. She wanted me to have stability, a father figure, a normal family life. So Matt stepped into the shadows and let you play house. The nervous lawyer who'd come with Nicole was frantically shuffling through his papers, sweat beading on his forehead. Mrs. Morrison, I don't think. This changes everything. If there's a biological father with legal standing. Shut up, Nicole snapped, but her voice lacked its earlier authority. She was staring at the business card as if it might burst into flames. I stood up slowly, feeling taller than I had in months. The trust activated the moment you destroyed Mom's will. Every asset, every account, every piece of property, it's all legally mine now. Not when I turn 25. Now. That's fraud. Nicole shrieked, finally losing her composure completely. You can't just, this is all fake. Those documents are forged. The doorbell rang, cutting through her hysteria like divine intervention. I walked to the window and looked out to see a black sedan parked in our driveway. Two men in expensive suits were approaching the front door, briefcases in hand. Actually, I said, turning back to face the room, I think you'll find everything is perfectly legal. Those would be the attorneys from Chin and Associates. I called them this morning. Nicole's face cycled through several shades of red and white. You couldn't have known. I've known for 3 days, I interrupted. Ever since I visited Mom's storage unit and found the letters. Ever since I talked to Margaret, who told me the whole story. Ever since I realized that my mother was 10 steps ahead of everyone, including me. The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. Ryan hadn't moved from his chair, staring at the DNA results as if they might change if he looked long enough. Matt wrote to her every week for 18 years. I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. Every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone. He wanted to be part of my life, but Mom was terrified that it would destabilize the family she tried to build. So they made an agreement. He'd support us financially and legally, but stay in the background until I was old enough to understand, or until... Until what? Ryan asked, his voice hollow. Until someone tried to take away what was rightfully mine, I finished. Mom knew exactly what kind of person Nicole was. She knew you'd be too weak to protect me when the time came. So she made sure I'd have protection from someone who actually loved me. I walked to the front door, my hand resting on the doorknob. Behind me, Nicole was screaming something about lawyers and fraud and injustice, but her words felt distant, powerless. The nervous lawyer was packing his briefcase with shaking hands, clearly wanting to escape before he became complicit in whatever was about to unfold. The beautiful thing about trusts, I said, looking back at Nicole one last time, is that they're designed to be ironclad. Especially when they're set up by someone as brilliant as Matthew Chen. You wanted to play games with legal documents? You're about to find out what happens when you challenge someone who actually knows how to use them. I opened the door to find 2 attorneys who looked nothing like Nicole's nervous, sweaty lawyer. These men radiated confidence and competence, their handshakes firm, their smiles warm but professional. Miss Morrison, the taller one said, I'm David Park from Chin and Associates. We've been looking forward to meeting you. Your father sent us. Behind me, I heard Nicole make a sound like a wounded animal. Ryan was still silent, still staring at the evidence of a truth he'd never suspected. Is he here? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. David Park smiled. He's waiting in the car. He wasn't sure if he'd want to see him yet, given the circumstances. But he's been waiting 18 years for this moment. Through the window, I could see a figure in the backseat of the sedan. My biological father. The man who'd loved my mother enough to step aside for her happiness, but who'd never truly let go. The man who'd been my invisible guardian angel, protecting me from a distance while I grew up calling another man, Dad. Everything I thought I knew about my life had just crumbled to ash like Mom's will in the fireplace. But for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The attorneys worked with surgical precision. Within 30 minutes of their arrival, David Park had spread documents across our dining room table like a general planning a campaign. Each paper was meticulously organized, each signature authenticated, each legal maneuver executed with the kind of efficiency that comes from years of preparation. The trust activation triggered several automatic procedures, David explained, his voice calm and professional as Nicole paced behind him like a caged animal. Bank accounts, property deeds, vehicle registrations, everything transfers immediately upon the destruction of the original will. Your mother was very thorough. I watched Nicole's face cycle through emotions. Disbelief, rage, panic, and finally a kind of desperate calculation as she realized the scope of what was happening. She pulled out her phone with shaking fingers, frantically dialing numbers. Hello? Yes, this is Nicole Morrison. I need to access my account. What do you mean frozen? On whose authority? Her voice climbed higher with each word. This is ridiculous. I'm calling my lawyer. But David Park was already shaking his head. I'm afraid your lawyer will find himself quite busy today. Chin and Associates has filed motions in 3 different jurisdictions. The freezing orders were signed by judges who've been expecting these documents for months. Nicole's phone clattered to the floor as the reality hit her. Months? You've been planning this for months. 18 years actually, I said quietly. Ever since Matt realized he had a daughter he couldn't protect directly. The second attorney, who'd introduced himself as Marcus Webb, was reviewing a thick folder of financial documents. Mrs. Morrison, Nicole Morrison, it appears you've been quite busy these past 6 months. Multiple account transfers, property deed amendments, insurance beneficiary changes. All signed and notarized. Those were legitimate. Nicole snapped. Ryan signed everything willingly. Marcus looked up from his papers, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. Mr. Morrison, could you explain why you transferred ownership of your deceased wife's engagement ring to Mrs. Nicole Morrison just 3 weeks after the funeral? Ryan's face crumbled. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his choices. She said Catherine would have wanted her to have it. That it was a symbol of moving forward. And the antique furniture collection? The one that belonged to Catherine's grandmother. Nicole said it didn't match the new decor, Ryan whispered, his voice barely audible. I felt something cold settle in my chest as the full scope of Nicole's systematic erasure became clear. She hadn't just been stealing money, she'd been stealing memories, pieces of my mother's life, fragments of our family history. David Park slid another document across the table. This is a comprehensive inventory of items sold, donated, or transferred in the past 6 months. Your mother anticipated this possibility and had everything catalogued and photographed before her death. The list was devastating. Mom's jewelry, her books, her art collection, even the handmade quilts her grandmother had sewn. All of it sold or given away by Nicole while I was grieving, while I was too broken to notice the systematic dismantling of my inheritance. You documented everything, I said, looking at Nicole with new understanding. Every theft, every lie, every piece of my mother you tried to erase. Nicole's mask finally slipped completely. She was dead. Dead people don't need jewelry. Dead people don't need photo albums. I was making room for the living. You were making room for yourself, I corrected, and erasing any trace that my mother ever existed. Marcus Webb stood up, adjusting his tie with the casual confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. Mrs. Nicole Morrison, you're being served with several court orders. Asset recovery, fraudulent transfer claims, and breach of fiduciary duty. You have 48 hours to vacate these premises. Vacate? Nicole's voice cracked. This is my home. I'm married too. You're married to a man who has no legal claim to this property, David Park interrupted. The house was owned by Catherine Morrison's trust. Ryan Morrison was listed as a beneficiary, but never as an owner. Upon Catherine's death, all assets transferred to her biological daughter. The words hit Ryan like physical blows. He slumped deeper into his chair, finally understanding the scope of his legal powerlessness. Catherine never told me, he whispered. All those years I thought. You thought she trusted you enough to make you an equal partner, I said, not unkindly. But she was protecting me from this exact scenario. She knew what would happen if someone like Nicole ever got their hands on everything she'd worked for. Over the next few hours, the house transformed around us. Movers arrived to reclaim furniture that belonged to the trust. A locksmith changed the security system codes. Even Nicole's precious crystal figurines were packed away. They'd been purchased with funds from Mom's accounts, making them legally mine. I found myself in Nicole's bedroom as she frantically packed her personal belongings. Her movements were jerky, desperate, like someone trying to salvage what they could from a sinking ship. That's when I saw it, a glint of gold tucked in the back of her jewelry drawer. Mom's wedding ring. The simple gold band she'd worn for 20 years, the one she'd never taken off even during her final illness. Nicole had stolen it from her jewelry box, probably within days of the funeral. I picked it up without saying a word, feeling its familiar weight in my palm. Nicole spun around when she heard the drawer close, her eyes immediately locking onto the ring in my hand. That was a gift, she said quickly. Ryan gave it to me. It was his to give. No, I said quietly, sliding the ring onto my right hand. It fit perfectly as if it had been waiting for me. It wasn't. I didn't put it on out of sentimentality or grief. I put it on as a promise, to myself, to my mother's memory, to the future I was finally free to build. I would never again let someone erase the people I loved. I would never again stand by silently while someone dismantled my family's legacy. By evening, the house was empty except for me. Nicole had left with 2 suitcases and a bitter promise to fight this in court. Ryan had followed her, mumbling apologies that carried no weight, explanations that explained nothing. The lawyers had departed with their boxes of evidence, their work here complete. I walked through the rooms slowly, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The walls looked strange without Nicole's sterile decorations, but they also looked hopeful. like blank canvases waiting for real life to return. Mom's furniture would be returned within the week. Her photos would go back up on the mantle. Her books would fill the shelves again. In the kitchen, I made myself a cup of tea using Mom's favorite mug, the one with painted violets that Nicole had banished to the back of a high cabinet. The tea tasted like victory and sadness and possibility all mixed together. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like celebrating. Nicole's downfall hadn't brought my mother back or healed the months of pain she'd inflicted. But it had given me something equally valuable, the understanding that I was stronger than I'd ever known, that my mother's love had built protections around me that stretched far beyond her death. Justice and grief, I realized, weren't opposing forces. They walked hand in hand through the empty rooms of my reclaimed home, partners in the long process of healing. The castle Nicole had tried to build on my mother's grave had collapsed, not through violence or revenge, but through the quiet, persistent power of truth. That night, I sat alone in the living room where this had all begun, where Nicole had burned my mother's will while laughing about dead women and their gifts. The fireplace was cold now, its ashes swept clean. But I wasn't cold. For the first time in months I was warm. I was home. I was free. The morning mist clung to the cemetery grass like whispered secrets as I walked the familiar path to Mom's grave. In my hands I carried a bouquet of white roses, her favorites, and the weight of everything that had changed since my last visit. The headstone looked the same, weathered gray marble with her name etched in elegant script, but I felt different approaching it. Lighter somehow, despite carrying the heavy truth of the past few days. I knelt beside the grave and arranged the flowers carefully, my fingers brushing against the cool stone. "I found it all, Mom," I whispered, my voice barely audible in the morning stillness. "Every secret, every plan, every piece of the puzzle you left behind. I understand now why you couldn't tell me yourself." The wind rustled through the oak trees above, and for a moment, I could almost hear her voice in the sound, gentle, knowing, proud. She'd orchestrated everything from beyond the grave, leaving breadcrumbs for me to follow when I was strong enough, smart enough, ready enough to handle the truth. "Nicole's gone," I continued, pressing my palm flat against the headstone. "And I'm not angry anymore. I'm grateful. She showed me exactly who I am when everything else is stripped away. She showed me I'm your daughter in ways that have nothing to do with blood or DNA." 3 weeks later, I sat in a sterile conference room downtown, surrounded by lawyers and financial advisors who spoke in numbers and percentages that would have overwhelmed me months ago. But I wasn't the same girl who'd cowered in the guest room while Nicole dismantled my life. I listened carefully, asked pointed questions, and made decisions with a clarity that surprised everyone, including myself. "The Catherine Morrison Foundation," I announced, sliding a proposal across the mahogany table. "A scholarship fund for young women who've lost their voices, through trauma, family dysfunction, financial hardship, or legal manipulation. Women who were told to stay quiet when they should have been heard." David Park smiled as he reviewed my carefully drafted plans. "Your mother would be proud. This is exactly the kind of lasting impact she always talked about creating." "The second voice," I said, naming the program. "Because sometimes the first voice gets silenced, but the second one, the one that rises from the ashes, that one changes everything." The foundation's first recipient was a girl from across town whose stepfather had stolen her college fund. When I handed her the check at our small ceremony, I saw my own story reflected in her eyes. The disbelief, the relief, the dawning understanding that someone else had walked this path and survived. "Don't let them make you invisible," I told her, repeating words that Margaret Santos had whispered to me during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "Your voice matters even when they try to convince you it doesn't." Meeting Matt had been awkward at first, like learning to speak a new language with someone who already knew all my words. We'd chosen neutral ground, a small cafe downtown where neither of us had memories to navigate around. He looked exactly like the man in the photograph from Mom's safety deposit box, just older, with silver threading through his dark hair and laugh lines around his eyes. "I've been watching you from a distance for so long," he'd said over coffee that first day, his hands wrapped around his mug like he needed something to hold on to. "Your mother sent me pictures, report cards, newspaper clippings when you made honor roll. I have a whole album of your life that you didn't even know I was part of." We took things slowly, building a relationship on shared stories about Mom rather than trying to force an instant father-daughter bond. Matt never pushed, never demanded emotional intimacy I wasn't ready to give. Instead, he told me about their college years, about the dreams they'd shared, about the impossible choice Mom had made when she discovered she was pregnant. "She wanted to tell you about me when you turned 18, he explained during one of our monthly dinners. But then she got sick and Nicole appeared, and suddenly there wasn't time for gentle revelations. Everything had to be protection mode." "Did you hate Ryan?" I asked one evening as we walked through the park where he and Mom used to study together. Matt considered the question carefully, the way he approached everything, with thoughtfulness and measured honesty. "I felt sorry for him mostly. He loved your mother genuinely, but he never really understood her complexity. He saw the surface, beautiful, kind, devoted wife and mother. But he missed the strategist, the woman who could play chess 3 moves ahead of everyone else." 6 months after Nicole's departure, I received a single text message from Ryan: "I'm sorry." No explanation, no request for forgiveness, no attempt to rebuild what had been broken. Just 2 words that carried the weight of his guilt and the acknowledgement of his failures. I typed several responses, angry ones, sad ones, words that might have opened a door to reconciliation. But in the end, I deleted them all and put my phone away. Some apologies come too late to matter, and some bridges burn too completely to rebuild. Ryan had made his choices, and now I was free to make mine without waiting for closure that might never come. Nicole had vanished more completely, leaving behind only forwarding addresses and legal documents. Occasionally, David Park would update me on her failed attempts to challenge the trust or recover assets she'd never legally owned. But her presence in my life had diminished to what it always should have been: nothing. In my bedroom, now restored to its original warmth with Mom's furniture and my own belongings, I kept a small wooden box on the bookshelf. Inside lay the black envelope that had changed everything, its wax seal broken but its power undiminished. Sometimes, when grief threatened to overwhelm me or when I doubted my own strength, I'd take it out and reread the trust documents, the DNA results, the careful instructions Mom had left for protecting me. The envelope reminded me that love doesn't end with death. It transforms, becomes something more strategic and lasting. Real love leaves instructions, creates safeguards, builds bridges across time and silence. It anticipates the worst while hoping for the best, and it never, ever gives up. On the anniversary of Mom's death, I returned to her grave with a progress report. The foundation had helped 12 young women reclaim their voices. Matt and I had started a tradition of Sunday dinners where we cooked her favorite recipes and shared memories. The house felt alive again, filled with laughter and purpose instead of fear and silence. "I kept my promise," I told her headstone, placing fresh white roses beside the ones from my previous visit. "I didn't let them erase you. And I won't let anyone erase me either." The wind whispered through the oak leaves, carrying my words up toward a sky that seemed endless with possibility. Somewhere in that vastness I felt her presence, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a living part of who I'd become. Her legacy lived in my voice now, in the strength she'd built into my foundation, in the instructions she'd left for love to follow even after the first voice fell silent. The second voice was mine now, and I would never let it be silenced again. If this story of calculated justice had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Amelia calmly placed that black envelope on the table, knowing her mother had planned for this exact moment. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.